Hello. So, I was gone for quite a stretch in December and January, which means I have a ton of books to talk to you about today. I am super excited to get into them. So, hello, my name is Steph. Welcome to my channel. I talk about books, obviously, reading and sometimes writing them. And this is going to be my recent reads, the things that I've read in the last 2 months. I think I have 10 or 11 books to talk about with you today. But let's start with book number 1, The Bog Wife. I started this in the very beginning of December, I believe. Yes, the way that I would describe this book is gentle bog horror. There's nothing that's like jump scary about it. It is incredibly atmospheric, very gothic. In it, we're following this family that has lived for many generations in this cranberry bog in Appalachia. And they are like semi-feral children and like now adults who really like reminded me of the House of Gaunt, like Voldemort's mother's house and like that whole situation. So the story kicks off when their father is about to die. And what typically happens with this family, according to their lore, is that the father will die and then the bog will basically produce or like spit out, like some woman will emerge from the bog and marry the oldest son to continue the family line. So because they live in such like a strange situation and in so much isolation, they are kind of almost childlike and stunted. Yeah, it's just amazing, like very witchy. We have always lived in this castle kind of vibes. I pretty much read it in one sitting. Like I had to go to bed and then I woke up before I like brushed my hair or anything and I just finished it. I think that this was the only book from 2024 that I was like really intensely anticipating that didn't actually disappoint me at all. It was completely not what I expected, but it was everything, like somehow it was everything that I wanted from a gothic. And it is some of the best written eco-fiction that I've ever read because nature itself is a character. Like I don't even know how to articulate it, but just it's not for everybody. A lot of gothics aren't, but I do really strongly recommend it to anybody who is interested in that variety of story. After that, I read The Vegetarian. This has been on my list for a super long time, but it is about violence and sexism, and it was a bit harder to read than I anticipated. Essentially, it is a magical realism that is about a woman in Korea who decides that she doesn't want to eat meat, but you never actually get her POV. You get the feelings and opinions and perspectives of the people who are all around her, like her sister and her husband. And the style was not completely for me, I think, but it was a really good book. And I think that had a pretty interesting message, but I just don't think that I have anything really exceptional to say about it. But I also have this thing, especially with Korean and Japanese translated books, where sometimes I wonder if things are being lost in the translation. There are times when it feels a little bit clunky to me and where I think that there is a little bit of nuance that I'm kind of able to grasp by, you know, some of the magical realism stuff that's going on. I just feel like it would be a much richer story if you could read it in the original Korean. But I really enjoyed it and it's definitely worth reading regardless. So that's The Vegetarian. After that, I've picked up The Wood at Midwinter. This is a short story by Susanna Clarke, who wrote Piranesi. It felt very different from her other books, I would say. Like, I really enjoyed it. And I was immediately sucked in by a description where a woman is described as having a long, pale, medieval face. You know, it's one of those descriptions that makes an image for me immediately. But it's a short story. You're not gonna get like a lot of substance, and I felt like it could have been maybe a little bit deeper than it was, or maybe I just kind of missed what she was saying or doing. But it was a nice pleasurable read and like way to spend, you know, a half hour or whatever in front of like a fireplace at winter time. It was nice. When you're comparing it maybe to her other work, you might find it a little bit disappointing if you go in expecting Piranesi in 30 pages or whatever. The next book was a DNF. That's The Dead Romantics. I know a lot of people seem to really like this book. It started off very strong for me, partly because I like weird stuff, and also because I'm very intrigued by more rom-com and like romance books that are set in or around funeral homes, because I feel like there's been this kind of sudden surge of them that have been published. And so this one is following a woman named Florence. She is a ghostwriter for a very famous author, and her family owns a funeral home. The premise feels very complicated to explain, but she has to go back to the funeral home because her dad dies. But before she goes back, she gets this new editor, and then the new editor ends up dead and shows up at the funeral home as a ghost because she also sees dead people. So everything about that premise was very appealing to me, but the book just felt too complicated for so little to be happening. There's all these things, but where it was like, oh, and because she's trying to help this editor guy who is now dead, like do stuff, but they're also not doing anything, and it just felt so slow. That is The Dead Romantics. The next book I am dying to talk to you about is insane, and it is called Grave Matter. This was one of the books that I mentioned on my Kindle Unlimited TBR. We are following, I think she's a PhD student who gets this very exclusive, very secretive job at a Alzheimer's research foundation, and has to like go and move to this very secluded laboratory research area in North Vancouver Island. Things get really weird from like pretty much page one. She's a mycologist. You've got weird mushroom stuff going on. You've got some kind of forbidden, questionable romance decisions going on here. And there's this section in the book quite early on where I was wondering, is it going to be sort of one of those horny thrillers like Verity? I wish I read this for a reading vlog actually, because I want to just the whole plot to you. It's unhinged. That's all I can really say. Was it the highest quality or caliber? No. There were major scientific liberties taken. I can't get past this. I'm so sorry. I am somebody who is pursuing clinical psychology licensing in the province of British Columbia, where this is set, and there is one character who is like, oh yeah, I have a psych license. I get a neurosurgery license at the same time. No, you don't. What the fuck? You cannot start cutting into somebody's brain with a clinical psychology degree. It doesn't work that way. Those are two completely different things. Oh my god. She does kind of acknowledge later on that there were major liberties taken. I don't know what was understood and what wasn't understood there, but it was, a fast-paced, fun read that if you're just looking for something that will pass the time and is crazy in a good way, pick this one up. Maybe, and just let me know what you think. The atmosphere, I have to say, was also fantastic. As somebody who lived in that area for a really long time, I can tell that the author is from that area just by the way that she describes things as just being salt-soaked and misty and dark and gloomy, very much like Twilight energy. And fun. It was a fun book. It was a fun book, not a perfect book, but I would read it again, knowing what I know. So then after that, I picked up Diavola. I was expecting by the cover for this to be pee your pants scary, but I would kind of say that it's more low to moderate horror. This was following a woman who goes and joins her family on a vacation to stay in this villa in Italy that has kind of a sketchy reputation in town. I think there were some major pacing issues with this book because so much of it took place off of this haunted property, which kind of broke the tension for me, because we would go off the property, get some information, go back on the property, be haunted a little bit, go off the property. I want to feel claustrophobic at a certain point. I want to feel like there is potentially no escape from whatever is terrifying you. And certain pieces of information were revealed. They just didn't feel shocking or as rewarding as they could be if they were done a little bit differently. So yeah, I don't know. Diavola, I could have passed on this actually. After that, I read a romance and it is a debut set in Vietnam. It's called Adam and Evie's Matchmaking Tour. So this book is about Adam, who is helping his sister with a matchmaking company in Vietnam that caters mostly to foreigners, and then Evie, who is a Vietnamese American, who goes on this matchmaking tour because some aunt died and wanted her to go back to like see her father's hometown. She joins this matchmaking company anyway, and obviously they hit it off. And I think that setup is absolutely fantastic. It's really interesting, and it would have been kind of hard to do, I think, just because there's so much potential colonial grossness that's kind of tied into some of that setup potentially, but I thought that she handled it in a really interesting and pretty good way. And I really enjoyed how she explored the relationship between culture and ethnicity and like obligation. I just thought that was super well done. But what I found challenging about this was that I think it needed a little bit more editing. Like, a lot of the effort seems to have gone into working on the concept and having some of the conversations that were happening in this book, which were done really well, but there's just like a ton of filler words that took me out of it constantly. And that isn't something that I normally would pick at too much, but I just felt like it was really hard for me to sink into this book. And maybe some of it was my mood. So yeah, I did not love it. I did not hate it. I just kind of really sat in the middle of the road about it, I guess. But I would definitely look at what other books this author writes in the future, because I think that she has really good ideas and that the ability to execute them really well is there. This was just not completely for me. After that, I read God Killer. I had really, really high hopes for this because I had heard so many really great reviews. I didn't love it, and I don't know if I'm going to continue with the series, but that might have been a lot to do with me because I was listening to this while I was traveling. I was kind of in a little bit of a slump and just struggling to find something that was going to engage me. Maybe I will tell you actually what this book is about first before I start complaining. Totally different world. There are gods all over the place, and usually they would have a temple. There is this main character who is kind of like Geralt of Rivia named Kissin. She really hates gods. She goes around killing gods, and she finds this god who has kind of made a home in, or is like somehow bound to this young woman. And so those two, plus by like a couple of like other people, go on this quest sort of journey together. Series of events happens, probably well written, but just none of it really stuck with me because I think I just didn't feel that invested in any of the characters. But kind of reminded me of City of Stairs, just in like the feel, plus 2 Kingfisher. So that's God Killer. I don't see myself continuing with the series because I didn't make any kind of connection with it. After that, I read the 3rd book in the Christmas Notch series. This is written by Sierra Simone and Julie Murphy. It's called A Jingle Bell Mingle. So this whole series is set in this town of Christmas Notch. It's very much like a rom-com, like feel-good, cozy Christmas book that's also like fairly steamy, because the idea is that in Christmas Notch every year they film these like cheesy Christmas movies. They call it the Hope Channel. And they accidentally hired a porn cast and crew and director to direct one of these films, and that's like shenanigans happen. It's like funny and cute and whatever. So this is about 2 characters that we meet in the previous books. One who is an adult film director named Sunny. She's, very bubbly and like fun, name is Destiny type of character. And one of them is this very rich guy who used to be in a boy band and is widowed and offers Sunny a place to stay while she writes the next movie for the Hope Channel. So the plot for this one, it didn't hit as well as the first one. The first one is definitely my favorite, but I thought that this book handled grief super well because both of the characters have experienced really deep grief in different ways. Isaac is widowed, Sunny has her own history that you learn about through the plot. But yeah, this one felt a little bit different from the other ones, but it was also wrapping up the series, so I think that you definitely need to read them in order if you're interested in them. They are a fun, cute, and slightly different from a lot of other Christmas holiday romances. So that is a Jingle Bell Mingle. Okay, Mr. Kitty has entered the chat. He's being a bit of a baby. But I hope that this doesn't feel super disjointed in the video, because I've actually had to stop it like 3 times to charge my camera because I didn't start with a full charge and I naively thought that I could. But this brings me to the next book that I read pretty more recently, Moon of the Crusted Snow. This is a quieter thriller that is following a Indigenous community in Northern Ontario as they encounter the apocalypse. This was really good. This is technically part of a duology, I believe, but you can totally read it as a standalone. I read it. I'm going to continue to the next book fairly soon, but I don't feel the need to. Like, everything was kind of tied up. I've read quite a few sort of on the fence or like kind of negative reviews about this, and I feel like people who review it poorly maybe are missing the point of the novel. This thing happens where they hit the apocalypse, they lose all power when they didn't even have that much connection with the outer world to begin with. And some strangers from down south in like the big cities and stuff come up to the reservation and kind of wreak a little bit of havoc. But at the same time as the apocalypse, they are also revitalizing their culture. I don't know how to even articulate some of the beauty of the juxtaposition that's going on here. I thought it was so good. I enjoyed the main character as they're kind of problem solving through this and like finding a new way to survive and to live despite the world kind of falling apart. So I think you have to go into the novel reading for a story about community and a story about this specific community with an interest in things like revitalization. Because there are some things that maybe other apocalypse novels would focus on or explain in greater depth than this one did, but this one doesn't, because it's not the concern of the novel, and I love that about this book. I'm kind of rambling, but I do feel like this was a fantastic read and it should be on all of the lists next to Margaret Atwood for Canadian speculative fiction. Okay, that is Moon of the Crusted Snow. Kind of have been in a little bit of a reading slump this week. Not a big one, just like a little one, where I've picked up a lot of novels, I've put down a lot of novels just because I can tell I'm in a mood and the mood is not reading that book. But I did pick up The 6 Deaths of the Saint again after filming the top reads of the year. Yeah, I won't talk about it super at length. I have already talked about it ad nauseum, but basically it's Joan of Arc vibes, short story, incredible, totally not what you expect when you're going in. Chef's kiss. Beautiful. Beautiful book. Story. So that is The 6 Deaths of the Saint. Oh, and there's like a supernatural kind of fantasy twist to it as well. Okay. The next book I have to discuss is Desert Creatures. Okay, this is the debut of the author of The Bog Wife. I enjoyed The Bog Wife so much, as you know, watching the beginning of this video. And I was hoping kind of for the same thing and just very curious to see how this author developed. And I think you can actually really see the huge amount of growth between this first book and The Bog Wife, but Desert Creatures is much more experimental. It's a very different kind of book structurally. There are only like 3 parts. There's not really chapters in between those. So it feels a little bit slower. We are following a young woman named Magdala. It's also in the United States. I almost say it's the Mojave Desert, but I've forgotten already. And we first meet her when she is traveling across this desert and joins a small community who are very much living like outlaws out there because it's the apocalypse and lots of these kind of weird, edgy communities have sprung up all over the place. This is very much post-apocalyptic, kind of Western horror vibes. I'm not sure. It's, I think, much more bleak than The Bog Wife. It's at times quite violent. There's a real speculative edge, like nature is a character in this as well, because there is this thing called desert sickness that you learn about very quickly, where people eat from the desert and they kind of grow into these like half cactus creatures. I don't know. This is like, I don't even know how to explain this book, but the kind of thread throughout is that Magdala she also has a disability where I think they call it clubfoot. She is kind of on a pilgrimage to Las Vegas, which is like this holy city in this post-apocalyptic United States. And she's going there hoping to encounter one of these saints that can do incredible healing, and feels much more literary at the same time as speculative, and I just don't know how to really describe it. I thought that it was quite well written. Her prose is beautiful, but it is a different kind of book. And whereas The Bog Wife was for me, this one is a good book, but it is less for me. But I'm still glad that I read it. I did have to push through it a little bit, and I'm not sure if I completely understand what she was trying to say. Like, there was a message, and all of the characters would be like, okay, I'm gonna tell you my story. And you would get these stories and these snapshots of different people's experiences and lives, and there was this desert connection, but it just felt, I'm not sure if I'm just not smart enough to understand, those desert creatures. Very chaotic description of desert creatures. The next book I realized I don't even have any notes for to talk about, but that is Forget Me Not by Julie Soto. And this book is a second chance romance, which is actually my favorite kind. I don't find that many of them that I really like, but the ones that I really like they really hit, and I really love them. So we are following, what's that chick's name? I finished this like last night too, so I should know. We are following Ama Torres, and she is forced to work on this wedding with her ex, who's named Elliot. And Elliot is a florist, a tattooed, hunky florist that's quite grumpy. And their past and what happened is slowly revealed through his POV, like past tense POV, and then the future and like what is currently going on is through her POV. And it was just great. So you're kind of seeing both stories unfold parallel to each other. And I thought that it worked really well, because the story that is happening in present day is them working together on a mutual friend's wedding who's like quite high profile. What I liked about this was that it wasn't just a miscommunication that was keeping them apart. Like, there was some where like, oh my god, if you just sat down and talked it out, that would help, but you would still hit this roadblock because of particularly Emma's internal baggage and shit that she's got going on in her life. And I love the cover. Like, I really like the lime green letters and the flowers, which have a lot of importance to the book, but I think that the art is really interesting because it's sort of like the work that you might see on Instagram. And I just think that's a really interesting choice, because a lot of the time they go like full illustrated, but I feel like this is a little bit, I don't know, more detailed. I like the cover. It's an interesting call, and it makes them really stand out from other books lately. So yeah, those are all of the books that I have read between December and January. I guess this will probably be posting like the first week of January or February. So if you made it to this point in the video, despite the chaos, thank you for watching. I would love to hear about your thoughts on any of these books. Leave them for me in the comments, and tell me what your favorite read was recently. Yeah, thanks for watching. I will see you again very soon in another video. Bye!